Under the glow of séance candles, a psychic medium sits trance-like at a table. In front of her is a blank notebook. She begins to write the words of a spirit claiming to be George Mallory, the mountaineer who disappeared with his partner Sandy Irvine high upon the north face of Everest only months previously. "I am Mallory," the words appear from her pen. "I can remember still the struggle for breath and the awful cold." Today, we're going to explore something otherworldly. The automatic writings of Geraldine Cummins, one of the great spiritual mediums of her time, who between November of 1924 and January of 1925 wrote several scripts based on visits by George Mallory. Some of the scripts reveal extraordinary detail that could not have been known then. But skeptics take note. 75 years after the automatic writings of Geraldine Cummins, George Mallory was discovered on Mount Everest in 1999, and many of the words written through Cummins' automatic writings show striking similarities to what was actually discovered by searchers on that day.
That George Mallory.
Oh my God.
And in those very scripts, Mallory divulged the details of that fateful day, June 8, 1924, telling the story of his untimely fate and his final steps near the summit of the world's highest peak, Mount Everest. And he told in no uncertain terms whether he and his partner made it to the summit or not. Could it be true that George Mallory returned from the afterlife to give an account of that fateful day on Mount Everest in 1924? Some would say baloney, but others, like myself, having compared what Geraldine Cummins wrote down on that page and what we know to be true from the discovery in 1999, are too many to just look past and brush off. It's almost impossible to fathom how so many details were similar to what was discovered on the day that Conrad Anker discovered George Mallory's remains. In this video, I'm going to read you verbatim some of those scripts from Geraldine Cummins, and you can determine for yourself what you think. Is it true? Did he return from the afterlife? First, we're going to recap the details of the fate of Mallory and Irvine, what we know and what we don't know. And then we'll talk about who was Geraldine Cummins and learn about what automatic writing is and why she was considered one of the greats and whose writings are considered to be, quote, the most convincing proof of the reality of life after death ever set down on paper. And then we'll talk about her benefactor, Edith B. Gibbes, and why she insisted on keeping secret any of those communications with George Mallory until well after her death. And then we'll dive into the automatic writing communications with the spirit identifying as Mallory. We'll review those writings and what we know now to be true. And then I'll offer my analysis about the possibilities that Mallory returned from the afterlife to share the details of his fate. In the spring of 1924, an attempt was made to climb Mount Everest by a party of British climbers who approached the mountain from Tibet, and two men were poised to make the final attempt. George Mallory, a skilled climber now on his third attempt of the mountain, and Sandy Irvine, a young, strong climber recently graduated from university. On June 8, 1924, they left from their tent with the hopes of getting to the summit and back down again. Exactly what route they took, we do not know, but at 12:50 p.m., Noel Odell, one of their climbing partners, looked up from his perch at about 26,000 feet, near 8,000 meters, and noticed two figures surmounting the ridge, moving toward the top. Clouds moved in and obscured the view of Mallory and Irvine, and they were never seen again. Fast forward 75 years later, Conrad Anker and a team of searchers on Mount Everest discover the remains of George Mallory high upon the north face of Mount Everest. Undisturbed, he lay exactly as he was when he fell 75 years previously. Hey y'all, I just want to jump in here real quick and say thank you to the sponsor of today's video, Sundays for Dogs. I don't know about you, but I've had dogs all of my life, and it's always been a challenge to try to get them to eat something not that they just like, but that's actually really good for them, and then have them keep eating it every day as opposed to having them get finicky after a day or two. I can't tell you the number of times that I broke down and went into the meat section of our supermarket so I could cook my dog chicken cutlets or lean hamburger meat, and that was the only thing that they seemed to really go to all the time. But Sundays for Dogs, the most incredible thing, it's air-dried 90% meat. Incredible, right? And the other 10% is all natural vegetables and fruits. This is really good food for your dog, and guess what? They absolutely love it. It even says human grade food on the bag. So to my mom's dog Teddy, who got human food for his entire life, this one's for you. I decided I'd try it on one of the most finicky eaters that I know, Lizzie. I take care of her often. She's a good girl, but boy, does sometimes she turn her nose up on the food that I give her. So let's see if it worked. If Lizzie likes it, I'm sold. Well, here's how it went. I opened the box that had the bag of sundaes inside it, and she already knew something was up. Look at her, she's adorable. I know that Lizzie doesn't really care what's inside of it, just that it tastes good, but the cool thing about sundaes is that it's all natural food, all natural ingredients, human grade, not processed. Look at her eat. So easy, no prep, pours right out of the bag, and because it's air dried, it stays fresh and keeps its flavor. It's a complete balanced meal, synthetic free, no synthetic vitamins. If you're a dog person, Sundays wants you, your dog, to give them a try. They're gonna give you 50% off your first order. Just go to the link in the description or use the code word Everest at the checkout. Starting a new dog food is no joke. That's why Sundays offers samples. All you have to do is cover shipping and handling, and they'll send you some good food that your dog can try out to make sure that it's the right move for you. Clicking the link will help this channel a lot, so thank you to Sundays for Dogs for sponsoring this video. And now back to the video. All right, let's bring some light into the subject and dive into the heart of this absolutely incredible story. Geraldine Cummins was born in 1890. She was an Irish spiritualist medium, a novelist and a playwright who began her career as a creative writer, but increasingly concentrated on mediumship and channeled writings mostly about the lives of Jesus and St. Paul, though she published a large range of other topics. She was born in Cork, Ireland. Her dreams were to be a novelist and a playwright, but as she discovered, she had an aptitude toward mediumship. And the turning point came in 1914. She was in Paris on holiday, and she stayed at a hotel, and also at the hotel, staying there, was a talented psychic medium. The medium came from Dublin and was living there with her physician husband at the time in Paris. And as it would turn out, Geraldine Cummins joined this woman at the Ouija board, and in that, a spirit guide came through the Ouija board, and the spirit guide predicted something shocking. Rivers of blood in France, houses destroyed by thousands, made homeless and killed. And the woman that Geraldine Cummins was sitting with abruptly ended the Ouija board sitting, saying that the spirit medium who was visiting, Ian, was playing tricks on them. She was outraged that he would predict such unusual and violent things. And as it would turn out, this sitting that Geraldine Cummins was at with this woman in Paris turned out to be only a week or two before Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in Sarajevo, which ultimately led to World War I. So pretty interesting. So that was her entree into mediumship. That friendship between Geraldine Cummins with this woman lasted for decades, and during that time, Geraldine Cummins developed her aptitude and ability as a spiritualist medium, finding that her main talent was in something called automatic writing, where the person receiving the messages from the afterlife sits down and puts him or herself into somewhat of a trance and begins writing as if the person from the afterlife is speaking through the pen. It wasn't long before Geraldine Cummins had a spirit medium of her own who was called Astor, who said that he lived in ancient Greece. And she began to develop not only her abilities at automatic writing, but in foreseeing the future. And ultimately, she predicted the death of her two brothers, which is chilling to contemplate. In 1923, a significant event took place in Geraldine Cummins' life. She met who would ultimately become her benefactor, Edith Beatrice Gibbes, who was a member of the Royal Geographical Society, which she entered in 1922. She was a woman of considerable wealth, widely traveled, and had become fascinated with communicating herself with the afterlife. After a talented musician friend of hers was killed in a road accident, she wanted to seek the help of mediums in communicating with that woman. And that's ultimately how she met Geraldine Cummins. Edith Beatrice Gibbes decided that she wanted to help Geraldine Cummins devote these talents exclusively to her mediumship and, if you will, took her on as a benefactor through to the end of Beatrice Gibbes' life. And in so doing, Geraldine Cummins had no need to ever work or earn any income. She literally went and ended up living with this woman in Chelsea on 25 Jubilee Street in Chelsea, London, where she focused at least 8 months of the year solely on automatic writing. It was in November of 1924 that Edith Gibbes had finally had success in reaching out to and communicating to a spirit that identified as George Mallory. But she had also, through the work and the mediumship of Geraldine Cummins, had extensive conversations with Percy Fawcett, the man known to have disappeared in the Amazon rainforest seeking a city of gold, if you will. And at the time, he was as famous, or probably more famous, than George Mallory ever became. And those writings and those scripts with Percy Fawcett ultimately became a book. And so now here's Edith Gibbes, who's a member of the Royal Geographical Society. She wanted to find out what the fate, not only of Percy Fawcett, but she wanted to learn what had happened to George Mallory and Sandy Irvine on June 8th, 1924, when they disappeared on Mount Everest. And now here's the interesting kicker. She thought that it would actually jeopardize her standing in the Royal Geographical Society. So all these communications were kept in absolute secrecy. Nobody was to know, ever, at least as long as Edith Beatrice Gibbes lived. So this wasn't to go out and try to shock the world with, we communicated with Mallory. This was just to be put into the reserves, if you will. And it didn't even emerge until 1990, when a spiritualist medium himself by the name of Charles Fryer went to the Cork City Archives and read extensively through all of the writings of Geraldine Cummins. And that's where he discovered these writings that involved conversations with George Mallory, and he considered not publishing them because of the secrecy around these conversations, but seeing that both Edith Beatrice Gibbes, and Geraldine Cummins had long since died, he felt that it was cool to publish them, and that's what I'm sharing with you here. Here's the book that was written by Charles Fryer. It was published in 1990 and then updated in 2013. I'm pretty sure Charles Fryer is no longer living. He was born over 100 years ago. It's called The Inside Story of Ireland's Greatest Medium, Geraldine Cummins, An Appreciation. So let's jump right to chapter 9, and what's written in here are 2 unpublished script sequences that Edith Beatrice Gibbes absolutely did not want anybody to know about. The first being Percy Fawcett, but that's for another video. I'm going to get into the communications with George, Herbert, Lee, Mallory. Now, one of the things that these 2 women were absolutely committed to was to make sure that it didn't look like any of them were prepping, if you will, for the information being communicated to Geraldine Cummins via her spirit medium, Astor. And so it said, the medium did not know of my intentions. The name conveyed nothing to her. This is when they were trying to reach out to George Mallory. I was endeavoring to see if in time the communicator would mention the last climb and say if he and Irvine got to the top or not without mentioning to the medium in any way the information which I was seeking. So that's written by Edith Beatrice Gibbes, who did not convey any information about Mallory or an Irvine. So take that with a grain of salt or take it for what you will. So there were several scripts, and now here's how the first communication went through. She writes onto the page, Geraldine Cummins via Astor, there are several near you tonight, a man who was here before and found it hard to speak. And then Edith Gibbes says, please let him do so. And then the person speaking through the pen, I want to talk. I am clearer tonight. You called me before and I was puzzled. I am Mallory. I am wondering if my people are known to you. I don't think they would believe I was alive. I am getting away now from the darkness I slipped into after that suffocating time. I can remember still the struggle for breath and how the hammer seemed to go on beating in my head, knock, knock, and I wouldn't give in. I had got so far, and after the awful cold, I wonder, has anyone succeeded, or will anyone? I'd like to warn chaps not to try. It can't be done. This is in the first legitimate communication with George Mallory. Mallory goes on to say, I was very strong and fit. Few could last like I could. I feel rather a fool now, after all. There were heaps of things better worth doing, but it was always my dream, Everest. I used to study it on the map when I was a boy. The trouble is, nothing can give the necessary oxygen. That's what beat me. I stuck out everything else. And then Edith Beatrice Gibbes asked the question we all want to know. Did you reach the summit? And then through the pen of Geraldine Cummins, the answer was, not quite. It rose right above me. I remember my despair. Oh, if I'd got to the summit and died, I wouldn't mind. And then she asks, do you remember anyone with you? Yes, but I seem to have the last bit to myself. At least I seem to die alone. So then she says that the subject of going back to Everest is under consideration, and Mallory replies, no, really, it's no good. They can't succeed. It seemed to be possible when I started. You know, I thought that the last bit could be overcome if one went at it slowly. It got fearfully cold. I have only a vague recollection of my collapse and the torment in my mind. It wasn't death I feared, it was failure. Everest, it haunts me still. And then Edith Beatrice Gibbes says, I'm a wanderer myself and was so interested in the expedition. That is why I hoped you would be able to come and speak to us. Gibbes says, asks the question, well, naturally there is much conjecture as to whether you succeeded or failed. And then in all capitals, no, I failed. Incredible. Sometime later, he reappeared and they continued the conversation. So then speaking as Astor, Edith Gibbes, for Astor, who is the spirit medium, Astor here, do you wish to speak to the lonely spirit? I think he is near. And then Mallory comes through and says, Mallory, you told me I might come again. I want to talk to the earth and I'm getting a clearer view of life. Are they going to try again? Implying, are they going to try Everest again? And she said, yes, another expedition is talked of, but not for some time. And then after some conversation, Gibbes asked him, she said, was there a precipice connected with your death? And he answers, now this is fascinating, it knocked me out, of course. I made a mistake, as you probably know, in the mist, and I slipped, caught hold of something, then slipped again. I didn't fall so far, but it broke something in my body. I can't quite say what. Anyway, I couldn't stir, just lay there waiting. Such a dreary time. So shortly after, they end that conversation because the medium was getting tired. The writing, apparently it's very taxing physically on the body. And so sometime later, they sat again, and Edith Beatrice Gibbes says, Astor, will you ask the man Mallory to speak to us? He was here the other night. And then short while after, Gibbes asked, do you think if another expedition is arranged, it will ever achieve its object? And he answers, no, it can't be done. The cold and absence of air high up make it out of the question. No one will ever see the top of Everest and live. I didn't know what obstacles I was up against, really, and I always thought I could turn back. My pal went west, too. Can you tell us anything about him? She asks. He was done by the air difficulty. I don't think he was as tough as I had to part from him. He couldn't travel at my pace, and I think physically he was weaker, the weaker man of the two. And I've thought since there's only one way by which Everest might be climbed, the scientist's way. If some of these experts could put their heads together and invent some kind of process by which we could continue to get enough oxygen, I believe there is just a chance. And so shortly after that communication ended, it says in the book, it's not known whether Mallory made any further communications. And then obviously the reasons these were not made public was that Miss Gibbes, having been a member of the Royal Geographical Society, feared for the continuance of her membership if her dabbling with the mediums to satisfy her curiosity were to come to the knowledge of that august body. Amazing, absolutely amazing. So let's move on to review that and see what similarities they actually have with reality, with what we actually know about Mallory and Irvine since the discovery of George Mallory's remains in 1999. Well, one of the things he talks about is slipping and then getting up and then slipping again. And then he said something broke. And now we know for a fact that on the remains of George Mallory, his right leg was broken completely in half under the right knee. It snapped. It was an open wound fracture, a devastating injury. There's no way you could possibly survive that. And even before that, he talks about the knocking, knock, knock on my head, which absolutely almost made my eyes pop out of my head, because when I was there at the remains of George Mallory, I was the one who discovered that over his left eye was a golf ball sized hole in his skull. I'm not saying this to be gruesome or anything of that nature, just to say that in this medium's writing, he talked about a knocking on his head, mind-boggling, and he talked about the devastating cold. Now, whether you want to believe he made it to the summit or not, from what he says in this, and he said most emphatically they did not make it to the summit, what it says to me is that Mallory did turn around before dying, and that he left Sandy Irvine behind to continue his attempt at the summit. That is something that, believe it or not, is comforting for me, because there were times where I felt not angry at George Mallory, but somewhat miffed at him that he would bring this young kid up on the mountain and just lead him to death. But it sounds like he said, "You're going to have to stay back. I'm going to continue on." And it didn't succeed. He was unsuccessful, and that's when he fell and tripped and had 2 slips, breaking his leg, and then, of course, the hole in his head. Now, we also have to keep in mind that Geraldine Cummins, even though she's speaking through her medium Aster, has no prior knowledge of this. How could she ever know that there was a kit that people wore on Mount Everest only, 3 months before the first writing of this, or 4 months? Mallory purports to say that if anybody is ever going to succeed in getting to the summit of Mount Everest, they are going to need scientists, a kit that's going to allow them the opportunity to breathe and have more oxygen. And because, as we know, as our theorists and mystery sleuths all know, one of the great questions is, did Mallory and Irvine, have enough oxygen to make it to the summit? I never did believe that they did, and I think had they run out, and I'm sure they did, it would have stopped them literally cold in their tracks wherever they were going, and they would have had to turn around. It just would have been an impossibility to continue climbing up in that bitter cold. Let's take a case in point when Conrad Anker and Leo Holding went back to Everest to recreate the climb of Mallory and Irvine wearing period clothing, wearing the clothes that Mallory and Irvine were wearing, literally right down to the socks and the hobnail boots. They couldn't do it. They had to bail and put on down clothing and their high altitude boots to complete the ascent. So here we have Conrad Anker, ostensibly one of the strongest high altitude climbers in the world, who was unable to make it happen in the clothes. He also, we're not going to have a conversation about what route they took, but on that trip, he also did a free climb of the second step, proving that it theoretically would have been possible for Mallory to ascend the step. Now, getting back down the second step, whole nother deal. Maybe that would explain why he had a rope attached to him that was broken some yards or meters out from his waist. So what do you think? Can you believe this? Is this something that you think is a possibility? Well, personally, I like to think that it's very possible that Mallory returned from the afterlife to communicate in any way he could. I believe in the afterlife. I'm not trying to push it on anybody, but I'm sure everybody here has at least considered it and thought about it. I think that this is a strong possibility that it took place, and I continue to this day to watch videos about near-death experiences and listen to the wisdom that people bring back from the other side when they awaken, such as understanding how important our character is and how we treat others and if we judge others or not, and how important it is for our lives that we treat other people the way that we would wish them to treat us. And now, if you've gotten this far and you're not a subscriber, can you hit that subscribe button, click like, and share it with a friend? Thanks so much. Do somebody a good deed. Don't ask for anything in return. Make the world a better place, one tiny step at a time. Peace be with you, my friends.